Members will move on to matters of public interest. I call the member for Nananga.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. This summer of disasters has shown how heroic ordinary Queenslanders are in times of tragedy. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, it has also shown how the Labor government has left Queensland dangerously exposed. Queensland is facing a $1.5 billion repair bill from these disasters, but we are already $83 billion in debt because the Labor government can't manage the economy. It means there is nothing left in the bank when there is the next fire, the next flood or a cyclone comes our way. Queenslanders hit by disasters now face being slugged with even more taxes because of this terrible planning. No matter what the problem is, Labor's solution is always tax, tax, tax and more tax. Mr Deputy Speaker, I have ruled out introducing any new taxes because the LNP knows that you cannot tax your way to prosperity. Labor has no plan to help the Queensland economy. Instead, as we've heard this morning in question time, they are turning their back on the resources industry and deliberately destroying thousands of jobs, even with the Deputy Premier calling on coal workers to reskill, Mr Speaker. The Premier could not even bring herself to say the word Adani at the Queensland Media Club just last week. Her leadership on this international issue is an embarrassment. Even the state government's own resources expert, Commissioner Chestnut, said the process, Mr Deputy Speaker, was an absolute mess. The unions are also outraged by the radical agenda of those opposite. They know Labor is selling out on jobs and turning its back on the very important resources industry. This Labor government is a mess, and the rot, Mr Deputy Speaker, starts at the top. On this side of the House, the LNP is a united team backing jobs and the Queensland resources sector. Those opposite are hopelessly divided and dysfunctional. Labor is betraying— Order, members. Member for Nananga, Thank you. Labor is betraying all of Queensland, but they are desperately betraying regional Queensland. The gap between the regions and the city is only widening under Palaszczuk. Just look at the crisis—
Order. Just one moment. Pause the clock. Yes. Thank you.
The gap is widening in regions and the city under Premier Palaszczuk in this government. Just look at the crisis in the rural maternity services. Now, it was shocking to hear that mums are being handed do-it-yourself birthing kits. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I can imagine the fear of being a mum to be in the bush and being handed a do-it-yourself medical kit because our maternity services in the bush are being shut down. This is a shocking disgrace for the maternity services in regional Queensland. And what did we hear from this incompetent health minister? Well, he blamed the private GPs. Well, no wonder those private GPs are handing out those birthing kits, because we can't trust the Palaszczuk government to support mums in the bush in their regional maternity services. This government couldn't be more out of touch if they tried. They have shut down 26 regional maternity services since 2000. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Chinchilla Hospital is once again on bypass, and it was being closed down after most of last year. Women deserve better no matter where they live. Now, it was the LNP that reopened maternity services that were shut down by this Labor government. Mums in the bush deserve exactly what mums in Brisbane get. An LNP government wouldn't waste our time and our effort and our money on renaming hospitals. We would put patients as our priority, Mr Speaker. But just getting out of an ambulance under and into a hospital bed is an achievement under this Palaszczuk Labor government. Ambulance ramping is now on average at 24%. And if you're unlucky enough to have to go to hospital in Logan, you are there on an average of 40% extra at the Logan Hospital. The Premier has broken her election commitment to provide better health services in this state. The health system is in chaos and it is at crisis point, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, Queenslanders also deserve safe communities. But what we see in Queensland now is a serial sex offender walking our streets without GPS tracking. Those opposite are the ones who have let serial sex offender Robert John Farden live in public housing.
Pause the clock. Order, members. It's not permission for you to then start debating across the chamber. It's been made very clear by the Speaker what the expectations are. If you continue like that, I'll be starting to name members.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And those opposite have the right to be embarrassed because it is the Palaszczuk Labor government that have let this serial sex offender wander our streets, living not but 100 metres away from a childcare centre, stone's throw from a school. The public are rightfully disgusted. The public are rightfully disgusted by the Palaszczuk government because they know that the Palaszczuk government couldn't care less for their safety. They are terrified that someone like this sadistic criminal history of Farden is walking free on our streets. And in true Labor style, the Premier, the Deputy Premier and the Minister all pass the buck to the Police Commissioner. Queenslanders want leadership, Mr Deputy Speaker. They want a Premier who is prepared to take responsibility. Queenslanders are rightfully asking, what does this Premier get paid for if she can't take responsibility for decisions of her own government? The public want answers, they deserve answers and they deserve accountability. And the buck stops with the Premier. We must ensure our kids are safe from persons such as these predators, but our kids can't defend themselves. But we as legislators can defend them. The heartbreaking story of little Mason Jet Li exposed serious flaws in both the child safety system and the judicial system. It's time Labor released that report into how the Department of Child Safety failed young Mason. No more cover-ups, no more secrets. We must be relentless in preventing harm to our children. Sadly, passing the buck is just a theme under Anastasia Palaszczuk and her government. The Premier's press conferences, Mr Deputy Speaker, last week and in the previous year have been littered with responses like, I haven't been briefed, I didn't see the media about that, there's been a disaster on, oh, hang on, it's Canberra's fault, oh, no, hang on, it's Newman's fault. She doesn't say this despite the fact Labor have been in power for the last 19 of the last 22 years. But the Premier simply doesn't get it. The Premier simply doesn't get it because maybe she's not briefed or maybe she just simply doesn't understand. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, you can't lead this state if you are not taking responsibility and owning up to your own government's mistakes. The Premier, Mr Deputy Speaker, she won't support an independent inquiry into bushfires. She won't answer questions about Ross River Dam and the releases. The Premier won't call out poor behaviour by those Labor members. When Robert Schwarten called one of my team a terrible word, we heard nothing. When the Deputy Premier of Queensland said the same terrible word, we heard nothing. Mr Deputy Speaker, when Labor power broker, Mr Deputy Speaker—
Order. Order. Member for Nango, you have the call.
When Labor power broker Dave Hanna was convicted and sentenced, what did we hear from those opposite? What did we hear from the Premier?
Order.
Nothing.
Members, we've made it very clear. Thank you. Members made it very clear you won't be debating across the chamber. I will start to name members who counter that direction. Make it very clear.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And when we heard about the vote rigging and the community was screaming out about the vote rigging around Lady Salento Hospital, what did we hear from this government? I know nothing, I see something, and I can't do anything about that. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not leadership, it is cowardice. Mr Speaker, when I took this job, I said I would offer solutions, because it is obvious that the Palaszczuk government are incapable of coming up with their own solutions. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, it will be the LNP team that will continue to work together for all of Queensland. We will continue to make sure that all of Queensland is heard. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, we will always stand up for jobs in this state in the very important industries of resources and agriculture, and making sure, Mr Speaker, that decisions are being made for the best interest of those Queenslanders.
Thank you. Member for Nanango.